.ts file you're going to have. That's why we have Forms API. How many of you have used it? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. Yes, so Form API provides a collection of functions to enable the processing and display of HTML forms. How to do this? You need to define a function like myModule example form, and this function has two parameters. The form, which is a rendable array of form elements. Each of the form elements has a type, and based on this type, you can define some custom properties for it. And also, you have the form state. In the form state, you have some values about the form being processed, like the values that the user has inputted in your form. Also, if you want to alter a form that was defined in another module, you can use something like myModule example for Malta. You will have also these two parameters, and you can alter them as you want. And two more functions, the validate and the submit, defined on your form. You can validate and submit the form. Okay, next. If you want, for example, to put your form in a small part of the page, you can do this by calling Drupal get form and rendering this form in the desired page, in the desired part of the page. If you want to display the form like on a contact page, and on this page to have only the contact form, you can define a menu item with the page callback Drupal get form and the page argument, the ID of the form. And also, if for some reason you want to submit the form without any user input, you can use Drupal form submit. Okay, next, something about Ajax. Ajax stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Basically, using this, you can rebuild parts of the page without reloading the entire page. This applies to Drupal or to Drupal forms also. You don't need to write any JavaScript for this. You just only define the Ajax property on the form element, and everything will work as a child. You just define the callback function for this property. This callback runs when an Ajax event is triggered on the specified wrapper with the specified method and with the desired effect. And another important thing is ctools, which is a collection of tools and APIs to improve the developer experience. How? Using modal dialog, which is very simple to put a form in a pop-up, with form tools, which improve the Ajax capabilities of the form. Also plugins, which let other modules implement a plugin from an INC file. This three will be demonstrated in the demo. And also form wizard. If you want to create multi-step form, it's very easy with ctools. And now putting it all together.
Okay. So first of all, I would like to ask you, how many of you used Ajax forms or created custom Ajax forms? Quite a lot. Okay, so I'll show you a bit of code. So the first example will be quite simple. Let's copy this. I created a module that has a .module file, and it has a .form.inc file for form elements. I included those in the .info, and I just copy this code here. So this will why we use Ajax? First of all, first of all, let's say we have a form and we have different elements in it. But we create a survey. We have a first name, last name, and we have certain types of interests. And of course, we would like to ask the customer further about his interests. But we don't want to display the whole form, only parts of it. So first of all, we ask him to select his interests, let's say games. And here comes the Ajax part. As you can see, we have a new element on the form. What happened here is that we defined an Ajax property on the interest, the radios, and depending on what we select, we have another element. And this is exactly what we wanted. So, in the code, this looks like, yes, here's our form. So we have the first name, the last name defined, we have a radio, and we have this Ajax property. So first of all, we have a callback function that will be called when the Ajax is triggered. There are many ways to implement these functions. Function. You can see it really doesn't do any big thing. So we just return a part of the form. We could have also returned a rendered array for the ready HTML here, but I usually choose to return only a part of the form, and on the form rebuild, depending on the values we have on the form, we enable the new element that was dependent on the Ajax. Our method was replaced. First of all, we created a div for the wrapper we defined on the Ajax property, as you can see here. This is the same thing. And this wrapper will be replaced with something that depends on the value of this radio. So let's see. We check if we have values in the form state, first of all. In our case, this means that we had some kind of form processing. And depending on the value we have, if we selected games, we return an element of the form. If we had cars, we return another element of the form. And so on. So basically, this would be it. I could have done another example if we had a select list and we had there quite a few values, let's say how many children you have, and if you select 5, then after Ajax we create 5 more inputs and you can enter their names. That would have been another example for Ajax. Okay. Of course, this form has it can be submitted, but we can submit it, but it's okay. Let's put it on. Yeah, that's it. And we select strategy. If we submit, I didn't do anything big. I just read the Drupal set message with the previously submitted values here. So, the next example would be creating a model, a ctools model. We enable this part of the code. Okay. So when we want to create a ctools model, first of all, we need to define a menu item in the .module file. it would be this one. Okay. What is important that we need to add some parameters here. ctools.js is one important thing. This way we tell that we want to have a ctools callback. We also create a callback function for the page, and optionally we can enable some arguments, and we'll see it later. Okay, so on the form, now we have this callback for the page. That is actually right now okay. And so on the page we had a form. This form has a link that will point to the menu item I just explained before. And for now this link is a form element, but it can be defined as any kind of HTML link. It's not necessary. We need to have these two includes for the link to be able to load the model. And we need to have the link, the class. This is very important to have a ctools use model class on the link, because this way we tell that we want to append a ctools copy. And we have a link. This Node.js is processed by ctools, and it is recognized as an ajax callback. So this is also very important. And we have an additional parameter for now, a static form ID, that will be appended in the ctools modal. Okay, let's go to the page. Okay, so we have a link. You can see, if we click this link, we'll have a ctools opt-in. So this is a form that we load on the ctools. It's a simple form. It has a title, a body, and a submit button, and it is nothing fancy about it. And of course, I created some kind of submit for this. So we have our form in the ctools pop-in, and we want to do some things with it. Let's say we put the subject, and we enter a message. And we submit. The form is submitted, and we can see that on the page we have what we have submitted on the ctools. I'll explain how this happened. So we had our values here. We had our submit function. We have the title and the body. And we output an item list that is renderable. And this here the trick comes in. We add an ajax command to append this element for this wrapper, and this is the output we have. You can see. So what happened on the ctools? What is the engine of the ctools callback? We need to have the mandatory to include the ajax and the model. We define a form state where we also mandatorily define ajax equal true. And we have a ctools model form wrapper. This is the one that is getting our form. So depending on the form ID, we get the form. And this part is dependent on what we wish to do. So if we have a text comment, as we had in the submit, the output will be the ajax comment. It was right here. Okay? And if, let's say we executed the form, but we can have any kind of submit flags here. So it's not mandatory to use this one. We can define, in case we have a multi-step form, we can define many types of flags, but this is by default. And we can add different things for ctools to do. If we manage to submit, we dismiss. So the plugin is closed, and we can see a result. But we could do reload, that would reload our page. We don't wish to do that right now. And we could do a redirect. So let's say if we executed the form, let's redirect to the front page. I will leave this commented for now. We render the form and exit. So practically, this is responsible for the whole model form, from the load to the submit. Third example would be to twist this up a little bit. It's here. Let's have an ajax form that generates us links. Let's put this in the code first. Okay. So we have a form here, and we want, depending on what we select, we want to load different types of pop-ins. I can load this cool form 1. You remember this one? And I can load this cool form 2. You remember this one? What happened here is that we tested this. We just okay. So we defined options for a select list. It's quite simple. We introduced the 2 form IDs as keys for these options, and we added the ajax callback on the select list on the form. And we generate this link. So an ajax is triggered, a form rebuild is happening, and depending on what we selected, we generate a different link, depending on what we selected here. So we can have 2 types of links, and the model can handle this because it was generated dynamically. I won't submit this form just to not lose time on it. The 4th example would be using plugins with forms. This part was the most interesting for me to work on. I had to work quite a lot on it. So first about plugins. Plugins can provide extra functionalities for modules, and are included. So for me, I created 3 plugins. In my example, let's say we want to hire different personnel for a company, but we have to have different forms for them to complete their applications. So depending on which department they want to work, we have to display different forms. We can easily do this by using plugins. It's not necessary, but it's quite a beautiful thing. We need to define a directory for our plugins, and we need to include this in our module. of all, we create files. It's a .inc file. Let's say we have this manager. This is quite simple. So we define our plugin, we give it a title, and we give it a class. I'll explain this class later. Ideally, we could have here an entire builder for this plugin, and that builder could be used if we want to use our plugin. My solution for this part was to create some classes that can inherit different properties. So on the plugin I define a class, and this class will be a reference to a class that I define. So this way we can make forms to be OOP. I create a base class, a job interface that can have different types of functions, like get form, validate form, submit form. This came in with Drupal 8 now. We can have here a constructor for the plugin, and we have, just as on the form, a definition for the form. We can have a validate function and a submit function. We can extend this. So let's see, we want to create a manager class, and we expand the get form. We can call the parent so as to have common properties and common functionalities. We don't wish to write that code twice. And we create different elements on the form. Yes, how we load this? So this plugin actually helps us to define what class we want to use. I could have put the code here that I have on the class. I mean, I have to rewrite it a bit, but I could put it here. But I want to have an extendable interface, so I mixed it up a little bit. Okay. In our .module file, we need to define where our module can find our plugins. So we have these plugins directory. We have, I give it the module name, presentation example, and an example type of plugin. So we define a plugin directory, putting the module name, presentation example, the plugin. That would be example. And we return a path. So here we can find our plugins. We also can define the plugin type. So we define example types of plugin, and we return them. So this is quite simple. We have our form. Let me show you. Ajax form. So we have here a select list, and we can choose 3 different options. And for these 3 different options, we will load 3 different types of forms, depending on what plugin we want to use. How this looks like in code. Okay. So the form basically has 3 parts. First of all, we are searching for a plugin, and it's a good idea to save it, so we don't get our plugins on every time we want to rebuild the form or reload it, just on page reload. So we store it in form state storage. We get our plugins. We say what type of plugins we want, the example type, and we save them. Next time we will load it from form state, so we don't have to do this twice. We have to define a select list that has an Ajax property that will trigger a reload for the entire form. And it has its options. I selected from the plugins to have as options key class, as you saw on the plugin, like here. This will be the key, and this will enable us to instantiate a class. So, the third part would be the part where we rebuild the form, and again, I made it dependable on form state values, because this is useful even if the form fails to validate. You always have form state values once you did something with the form. And depending on the job type that we have defined here, we return a plugin, and we instantiate, and we make an instance of a class. Yes. So here we are browsing our plugins. We have a list of plugins here. We are browsing our plugins, and we check if that class exists, and if that exists, we return a new class. So we'll actually have, let's say, a manager, or a security personnel, or and that class contains the whole form, the definition of the form. This is OP stuff. So once we have the class, we can use the get form. We send our form as parameter, and it will be filled with different elements. So let's see what happens here. So if we select child entertainer, we'll have a whole form. Depending on what we select, we display different types of things. You can complete this form. I won't submit it right now, but if you want, okay, I will submit. First name, last name. Have you worked with children? Let's say yes. How many years? 1, 2, 3, whatever. And oh yeah, we have a job. I'll let you read it for a second. Okay, once we submit it, we can see it was validated, and entertainer submit happened. What this means is that our entertainer callback, we had validate form. See, we have a validate form and we have a submit form. How this was called? Since we stored our plugin in form state storage, upon validate and upon submit, we can use this. We don't need to write almost a line of code for our validation, because we use the plugin's validation. That's the whole idea. So we check if we have the plugin, and if we have it, we just call the method. The same thing comes for the submit. So everything will happen here. We don't wish to do any particular thing on our form. We want to keep it generic as much as possible. So we had this validate code. We have a Drupal set message. I didn't want to complicate it. And we have a submit. If we selected a different plugin, let's say security personnel, and we submitted that one. We had army service. We understand army jobs, of course. We write a few lines about ourselves, and we submit this one. We can see generic submit happened. Let's see why. On our security personnel class, we defined a get form. We also called for the parent get form so as to have the first name and last name. We only want to define custom stuff here, nothing generic. We have personal info, this is the text area, and we have a job, and we have nothing after this. This means that the parent's submission and validation will be told. We didn't want to write anything custom here. In our third plugin, I think it was the manager, yes. The same thing. You direct employees. Okay. Qualifications. Let's say we worked at a fictional university. Yeah, we are fun people. If we submit this one, it was Hopa. It wasn't submitted. I knew this one. I knew this was coming. Sorry, we don't accept applications from fun students. Why this happened? I made a custom validation for this plugin type. And let's see. Okay, our manager class. Same thing, we have the get form, we call for the parent, we have different sets of fields here. And we have a validate form function that is applied only for the manager class. We call the parent sorry, I was wrote it. Yeah. And we are checking something. Let's say if we have fun in our text area, then we don't accept that kind of diploma. And we have our submit. We can call for the parent, and we can do different things here also. So what are the advantages? Using plugins with forms can enable us to create different sets of interfaces for a single form, dynamically. I worked quite a lot on forms that, for example, contain addresses, and we have a very, very big set of plugins for different countries. This is also a good example, because every country has different rules. So it is very useful to use these plugins when you have something that is similar, such as a job application, but you want to enable different things that are not common, so are specific, such as the entertainer or the manager. Okay, so if anybody has questions. I really hope you could understand the basic idea here and the examples. I will enable my code to download, so the whole module, if anybody wants to use it as an example, then they will be welcome. Okay.
A great presentation, by the way. What I would like to know is if you have any experience or thoughts about how to make those ajax forms crawlable, not only by Googlebot, but any crawling mechanism. Either you make some homebrew with Nokudiri or whatnot, or just make those crawlable by bots, because this is the main drawback from my experience in case of heavy ajax forms.
Well, most of the time these forms have to be very custom. So I tried different methods to generalize how to make Ajax forms more generic, but actually it always depends on what you need to implement and what your customer wants. Maybe I didn't understand everything.
Yeah, maybe you misunderstood me. What I'm trying to say, maybe your form leads to somewhere, or maybe that form needs to be crawled, as in walked through by some automation, like a bot or crawl or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, like going through it. And if it's an Ajax form, that's kind of a heavy burden on the crawling mechanism. And
yes, it is.
Not only Google.
Yes, I had this experience. It is. I actually implemented that kind of stuff.
And do you have any solution or quick fix to that?
Yeah, increase PHP memory limit.
Thanks a lot.
Actually, you have to try to make the returns, the arrays that you return, and the rebuild parts as small as possible. So if you work with, in my example, I returned a whole form sometimes. So this takes a lot. But if you return only small parts, if you can manage to return only small parts, then you can minimize those memory usages.
And basically, it's just
everything will be a bit faster.
Yeah, just small chunks of data.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Hello. Do you have any experience using this Ajax callback in node forms, altering node forms?
Yes.
And also attaching Ajax to existing fields?
Yes.
From my experience, the general practice is to return only the form wrapper in your Ajax callback. But in case of node altering, I usually experience that I also need to Drupal rebuild form use. What's your experience on this?
Well, if you...
For instance, if I want to conditional hide certain fields on different conditions, if I don't use on the Ajax callback Drupal rebuild form, the fields attached doesn't hide conditional. This was from my experience.
Ajax always has to rebuild the form in some way. So
no. I meant on the Ajax callback to expressly use the command Drupal rebuild form.
I haven't tried it before, but I think you can do that.
Yes.
Yes.
And another question, how reliable, if you use in projects, how reliable is the pop-up modal dialog? Because it could be pop-up blockers if you use ctools modal dialog in your projects. Because how reliable is this practice?
It's quite reliable. So developing it, you can have smaller problems, but it can be almost 100% reliable.
Thank you.
I think about node form, you were asking about node form, right? Actually, I think you can do form artwork, so you can add prefix and suffix, so that it should be in one view, you know, and it should be okay.
Have a practical problem, then maybe we can talk about it afterwards. And I can give you some hints.
Okay, everyone. So we are going to have a coffee break now. It's